Greer has power that both Namazi and the trans segment of the LGBT plus community do not.
So I wanted to show that bit just because I wanted to segue the other bit that I was talking about then with specifically talking about Greer, because the Greer example is atypical, and I have, God, I can't believe I'm saying this, I have Captain Andy to thank for this. Thank you, Captain Andy. Because he steered me along with this, because I don't really checked out the specific Greer example, to be honest, because I kind of got a little bit jaded with all of these no platforming things. But she was actually talking as part of the course content. And the form of no platforming that took place was more in terms of trying to intimidate her to keep away from campus rather than blocking her from speaking. Because it was part of course content, of course, the Students' Union couldn't block her as they could if she'd been talking for a student society. Now, the problem that they had with Greer wasn't academic standard. In fact, Germaine Greer is a feminist academic of decades standing. It was her views, her transphobic views. That was the problem that they had with Germaine Greer and why they were trying to get her blocked from talking or to make it impossible for her to talk. Now, according to Greer, Greer says that she'd never... The talk that she was giving, the lecture that she was giving had nothing to do with her trans views whatsoever. It was on a different subject. And she weathered the harassment and she gave her talk, and duly her talk had nothing to do with trans issues. The only time trans issues cropped up is because there were people that had turned up in the audience who, when it got to the Q&A at the end, rather than asking about things that related to her lecture, as they ought to have done, they brought up issues about her trans views, right? So that's the only relationship that it had. So I have to ask you, Peter, if this is what you mean by academic standards, then let's say that I'm running the communications department and I get a guest lecturer in to speak on communications, right? Maybe an electric engineer who's going to talk about an aspect of communications there, right? And it turns out that the lecturer is a young earth creationist, right? He's not going to be talking about young earth creationism, but he's still a young earth creationist, and we know that now, right? And he's one of the top experts on this communications field, but he's a young earth creationist. Should we try and harass him away from speaking on the grounds that he doesn't make the academic standards that we need for this course, and that our education is going to suffer on the grounds that he's a young earth creationist? That's what I put it to you, because that's putting it in within the scope of what you're claiming within this video.
And here is your fatal flaw. You have accepted what Greer and others have said about their attacks on trans individuals having nothing to do with the topic being discussed, when that does not make it a reality. She was discussing gender issues, and if you did not know, her attacks on transgender individuals are transgender issues, and said transgender issues are a subset of those gender issues we are talking about. Transgender issues should, as a subset of gender issues, influence other areas, much in the same way that evolution is a subset of biology, which should influence other fields of biology. So your analogy about someone being brought in to discuss communications who happens to be creationist just does not stand on this basis. We are talking about a person being brought in to talk about, say, taxonomy, who happens to be creationist. Now, the classification and understanding of species is not one innately linked to evolution. Taxonomy as a field predated Darwinian evolution and all the work which has taken place since. However, if modern taxonomists fail to allow discoveries and evidence such as that around evolution to influence their perspectives, then they fail to meet the standard in the exact same way that if Greer fails to allow discoveries and evidence such as the existence and persistence of trans individuals influence her perspective on discussions of gender. She acknowledges lesbian women for one, so she does acknowledge parts of queer theory, but she doesn't acknowledge trans women as actually existing. Rather, she takes on some rather trans-misogynistic views, continuing the persecution that cis women have faced, but with trans women, in the same way that many cis women have felt the same judgment about their appearances used to invalidate or belittle them. Simply playing the dishonest card and saying these topics which fall under the same umbrella are in no way related is not a valid argument, and you really need to reconsider this attempt at doing so. If a creationist who gave talks on taxonomy attempted to defend their orchard of life because taxonomy is not a discussion involving evolution, you would call that out then and there. You wouldn't defend it so fallaciously. You are in effect attempting to say that transgender issues, the issues being raised, is not a discussion relating to gender issues. I repeat, transgender issues are not gender issues. Do you see the issue? I have a microphone, I have a channel, I have a platform, and I do not have to let the Jermaine Greers, the Ray Comforts and the Vanny Harrys of the world use it or stand trial in court for a breach of human rights, i.e. freedom of speech.
Oh, fuck off with this shit, Peter. This is just absolute straw-manning bullshit, right? It's your channel, absolutely, and you can run it how you like, and you can have whoever you want on it, just the same as you can talk normally, or you can talk saying each word like it is a new sentence. That is your right to do what you will with your channel, but this is not what we're talking about, is it? You, like I said before, you make it sound like these speakers are just turning up at the universities and rattling the gates and saying, "Oh, you wankers, give me a fucking microphone, book me out a lecture theatre. I demand the right to speak," as they swig down their can of very strong beer. Right, but this isn't what's happening. These are people, often very well-known people, who have been invited to speak. Peter, invited to speak often by other student groups who are students just the same as your students. It's not like they're lesser students or they're students that don't count or they're some kind of lower caste of students, right, that you can just lord over. They are student groups who represent students who want to hear these people and have invited these people to speak. So how come you talk as if like these are your fucking personal resources? The university's resources are your fucking resources, and I don't want anybody to have these resources unless they happen to agree with what I say. Well, it just doesn't work like that, Peter. And just the same as I would have your back, absolutely, right? If you or anybody who agreed with your position was being no platform because some other group of students said, we don't want to hear this, right? We don't like what they have to say, right? If they were a load of bigots and they didn't want to listen to what you have to say, I would absolutely have your back. But I'm not going to allow you to do the same thing. And I'm not going to allow you to massively misportray this as if this is speakers just demanding out of the blue the right to speak at universities. That is absolute outrageous bullshit.
Did you actually manage to get anything about my position correct? First, it is absolutely what we are talking about, or at least what I was talking about as the one who initiated this conversation on how no platforming is not a human rights violation. Not when and where no platforming should and should not be allowed. And that was 100% clear in stating breach of human rights, aka freedom of speech, repeatedly, time and time again. Everything beyond that was solely your own assertion. None of that was mine, and I have taken it all to town throughout my responses. I have very little respect for that method of discussion or debate if you really want to stretch it out that far. It comes across as more childish insecurity. And yes, they do demand places. Yes, they do feel entitled. And yes, further discussion as to when and where no platforming should be used needs to be had, but none of that is going to be found in utilizing such dishonest methods. Are you a traitor? It's the exact same speak as the Cold War and post-9/11 narrative. You're either with us or against us. But as you now hopefully know, me not giving you my resources is not denying you your ability to speak or silencing you.
It's just the same straw man again, Peter, isn't it? So I'm not going to labour it. It's not your resources. It's not some particular political faction of the students' resources. It's every student's resources. And these speakers have been invited to speak, Peter, which suggests that at least some students do want to listen to what they have to say.
Yes, there are students who disagree with me, and nowhere did I suggest otherwise, so well done in making no point whatsoever. I mean, can you seriously point out where I actually pretended there was no disagreement on this? I noted there was a grey scale of opinion. I wanted to talk in that grey scale and not this black and white, it's a human rights violation, no it's not, therefore it's 100% justifiable in all cases. I wanted to talk beyond that and talk actual positions, actual held positions, not these straw-manned ones on both sides. So thank you for doing very little to actually address that. Want to change things? Prove your point. Keep piling up the evidence until it becomes undeniable, and then we can have this talk. Not when it is simply your opinion that LGBT plus individuals do not exist, or that the Earth is 6,000 years old, or that the sun rotates around us.
This is what I mean, folks, when I say he just keeps resurrecting these straw men so he can knock them back down again. Geocentrists are not on the NUS no platform list. They're not on any student union's no platform list. I believe that Peter runs an atheist society or a secular society or something like that at his university, or at least did at one point. And if he'd wanted to invite a geocentrist to have a debate with a physicist or whatever, right, about geocentrism, the students' union wouldn't be no platforming. They'd say, yeah, fine, that'll be a bit of fun. You crack on with it. They wouldn't say there's not enough academic rigour in this. We cannot allow this to take part. You know, he's portraying it again as if it's about academic rigour, but the truth is that is not why people are being no platform. They're being no platform because the views that they espouse are regarded as being racist or bigoted in some way, and in making some students not feel safe or just creating too much of a ruckus and commotion on campus. That's why they're being no platformed. But it's interesting that he brings up the subject of creationism and geocentrism, because it makes me think of this whole business of treating university students as if they're children. He talks about creationism, and of course, as they'll teach the controversy thing about keeping creationism out of schools. We're not really keeping it out of schools, of course, because in RE classrooms we can teach it, but in terms of keeping it out of the science classroom.
It's this very narrative that has allowed creationism to sneak back into the classroom under the guise of teaching the alternative.
But here's the thing, we're talking on one hand about schools and children, and on the other hand we're talking about universities and adults. And the reason that we're keeping it out of schools and children is because we don't regard children as sophisticated to be able to evaluate these different things, and we don't regard the school as having sufficient time to give the evidence that needs to be shown to allow the students, to allow the children to make that evaluation. But universities aren't involving children, it's involving adults. And I'm afraid, look, adults are flawed and they arrive at conclusions which are faulty. Of course they do, but adults are as good as it ever gets, folks. It's not as if we become super adults. If we can say, well, let's just protect the adults, let's shield the adults from these things, and then they can discover them and decide what's right and wrong when they become super adults, because there is no super adulthood. Adulthood is as good as it gets, and in fact your university years are perhaps the time when you are most receptive to new ideas and most capable. This is why a lot of scientists, their best work is done in their 20s and their early 30s, and then they kind of get a little bit set in their ways. So it's kind of tragic to stop people hearing these dissenting opinions, right? So why would you want to do that? If a geocentrist really wants, if somebody wants to invite the geocentrist to talk and debate at university, why the hell on the face of this earth would you try and stop that from happening? These are adults we're talking about, not children. Let's stop treating university students like they're children.
And this tackles the point that no platforming is not a human rights violation. How? How does that 3-minute segment even touch the topic being discussed in my video? The point made was that freedom of speech was used by theists in the exact same way to force others to foot the bill for their ignorance, and you have turned that into a comparison over something completely irrelevant. The abuse of proclaiming free speech was what was being discussed, not age and intellectual ability and another thing. Nowhere did I say topics cannot be discussed, so that's another dishonest move on your part. And this isn't a simple mistake you've made once in passing. It's something that you continue to make throughout your 40-minute video, never addressing the actual argument of my video. Let me just remind you of something. Comparisons or analogies have to work on what is being compared, i.e., claims of freedom of speech being used to force others to pay to promote you. In that, my point still stands. If, however, you want to compare it on some other thread, then of course it can fail. That'd be like me arguing that in lower education you need to do physical education, whilst at university you don't need to do physical education. Therefore there's a difference, therefore this comparison to highlight the false standard of free speech is flawed. Reality, that doesn't follow. Your argument does not follow through. Can you please address how your noting differences in the two fields being discussed has anything to do with whether something is a violation of free speech or not? Let's give one last analogy, just to hit home.
Okay, well this better be good.
If you view no platforming, the withdrawal or non-allowance of my resources to spread your opinion as a violation of freedom of speech, you have destroyed the scientific community.
It wasn't. Okay, now I can't just leave it at that. I'd like to. It'd be funnier, wouldn't it? But I'd kind of be doing him a bit of a disfavour to do that. It wouldn't really be fair.
Well, that would suggest that you have presented me fair so far, which, as my 3 videos have shown, completely dishonest. Not the reality. Could have done much better.
What he goes on to suggest is that science breaks down because the peer review process would break down. Why? Because if the journal Nature just had to publish anything, right? If I send some shite in, they've got to publish it, otherwise they're sort of censoring me or no platforming me and affecting my freedom of speech. That is his argument, folks. And it's like he's trying to bundle all his straw men up together here. For a start, nobody is suggesting that anybody who contacts a university should be given the chance to speak. As I've said it, I think I probably said this before, these are people who have been invited to speak, right? So that is a slightly different thing.
Withdrawal or non-allowance of my resources. Withdrawal or withdrawal or withdrawal, 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 withdrawal.
And the other thing is, if the journal Nature rejected my paper, I would expect them to do that on academic merit, and I think that is what Peter would do. Let me throw it back to Peter, right? If the journal Nature started rejecting people's work, and scientific journals generally rejected people's work, not on academic merit, but on the grounds of what attitudes they had towards trans people, or whether the scientists were racist, or whether the scientists were bigoted against homosexuals, right, then science would break down. No, they're expected to judge work on its academic merit. That's what they're expected to judge on. So if you want no platforming to work, put your fucking money where your mouth is. Stop judging people on whether they're racist or fascist or sexist or transphobic or any of these other criteria that it's actually judged on, which the NUS admits it's judged on, which the student unions admits it's judged on, and let's start judging it on the criteria that you bullshit claim that it's judged on, which is this academic merit.
You mean the standard I have argued by. You mean the standard I have voted by. You mean the standard I live by. You dragged in the NUS and assumed that I agreed with them 100% of the time and I didn't have any disagreement with what had come through. You dragged discussion over the qualifications of no platforming into a video where I didn't. I gave one example so I could highlight how no platforming is not a violation of free speech. Did I use the most clear-cut case? Absolutely, because I was trying to make an argument about freedom of speech and is it being violated, detached of the little details, because a human rights violation is black and white. Fact is, racism, sexism, homophobia and transphobia are based in ignorance. If someone sent in a journal article into Nature pushing the old colonial taxonomy and eugenics, that would not just be banned because, yes, it is racist, but also because there is no science behind it. If someone sent in a journal article which declared that women should not be allowed to drive because it makes pregnancy difficult or some other shit, that would not just be rejected because it was sexist, but it would also be wrong. If someone sent in an article arguing that the reason homosexuals have higher rates of STIs is not due to societal exclusion which drove the community underground, leading to an increased risk, but because they have a sin problem, yes, that would be homophobic, but it would also be wrong. So how do you defend the standard when it comes to trans individuals and the complete dishonesty about their existence? Not any random person can demand to have 24/7 airtime on the BBC. Is that a freedom of speech violation?
So here's the deal, Peter. You've obviously got it in your head that there are these individuals out here. They're not being invited to speak to university. It's not as if student societies are asking them, can you come and speak on this date? We'd love you to take part in this debate or to give us a speech or a lecture on this. No, that's not what's happening. They are contacting universities out the blue and demanding a lecture theatre and demanding a microphone and all the equipment be set up and demanding that people turn up and listen to what they have to say. So give me a list of this, right? Because I'm willing to walk back everything that I've said in this video if you can furnish a list of people doing this, because it's the first that I have ever heard about any of this. This has really it's really struck me like a bolt from the blue if what you were saying is true here. As far as I knew, people are being invited by universities and by student societies to go and speak. So give me your list and then we can take it from there.
Or I could simply point out the fact that I encompassed all scenarios back when I discussed retracting just before you inserted here, and right at the very beginning when I discussed car and diff, in which I mentioned that one of them prematurely accepted content and the other one raised issue with it and they retracted it. If I could just play that clip again. Of course, this is not true. Nobody has attempted to stop the individual from having their freedom of speech. Rather simply, both car and diff just have no interest in using their resources they have gathered from providing educational material towards promoting ignorance and intolerance. This is no platforming. Refusing to give someone a platform you control and the associated resources of time, space, and equipment. Now, if down to human error, Car had approved some content and uploaded it, only for Diff to view it and then realize a massive oversight on part of Car, leading to Diff to protest the content's existence on their channel, ultimately leading to the removal of said content, that is still not the silencing of free speech. People make mistakes all the time, and unless they have a contracted agreement, they are in no way obligated to continue to share their resources and time and audience with a third party. So if you want to cut away half of what I discuss and what I cover, and then attack me pretending that I didn't say such a things, in claiming that I'm just ignoring reality and saying this does not happen, how am I supposed to react? Oh, and they do demand it in how they react when students tell them no. That's how they demand it, by claiming that they have had their human rights violated, that they have the right to be given a stage, to be given an audience, to be given microphones and equipment, that they have a right to that. That is how they demand. Now, I raised the issue of you misrepresenting me with you directly, and all you did was make a slightly veiled argument from popularity, in that because the supposed majority misunderstood me and disliked my video, that meant that your dishonesty stood. Now, you asserted that if 95% of people did not understand my video, then the issue is with me, not them. And it's like, okay, but where are you getting that bullshit statistic from? I mean, you can't just do it on dislikes, because there were people who disagreed with me, people who didn't bother watching my video, people who were commenting before it had been out for long enough for them to watch my video, people who have quite clearly just seen the title and responded, not bothering to actually check what I say because I've completely contradicted them in what they commented saying what I had said. So clearly, no, that's not the case. It's nowhere near that far. But beyond that, it's not a good argument anyway. Why? If my channel was predominantly theist, say I was a theist for a very long time, I became atheist and I made the same arguments I make in my normal videos, just because the majority may not like to accept the reality of these arguments, may not actually be able to refute what I say and therefore have to fabricate alternatives and pretend that they're attacking that, does not then mean that the issue is with the arguments themselves. Was my presentation a little dry in that video? Absolutely. But the type of mistakes you have made do not suddenly become justifiable because so many others were ignoring what I said. And to recap, what I mean is the removing of segments from my video discussing how bigotry and lack of academic vigor are often interlinked with one another, because bigotry is based in ignorance and ignorance lacks academic vigor, which then contradicted your very next point after you'd cut this segment out. The dishonesty in how I ignored that in many instances the speaker was invited and then had their invite retracted, even though I at least noted that twice. Once at the very start of my video, and once right before we made the same argument again. On top of this, you took on my discussion on why no platforming can be a violation of human rights and when that occurs, to be my list on when and where no platforming should occur, as opposed to just where it shouldn't occur. And by that I mean just because something isn't a human rights violation doesn't then justify it, so that point was completely ridiculous. And that's without even mentioning my main point, which was the title of my video. The one that I stated I wanted people to take from my video, which is that we need to stop pretending that no platforming is a human rights violation. That was specifically stated as the thing I want you to take from this the most is that we need to stop pretending that no platforming is a human rights violation. And you just ignored it. You pretended that me noting how no platforming could become a freedom of speech violation was me giving qualifications over when and where no platforming should be allowed and should be applied, which was a conversation completely missing from my video. Now you say this wasn't intentional, and at the start I believed you, and I want to continue to do so. You keep asserting this in your responses to me via messages. But if so, I damn well expected so much better from you. Random commenters who clearly haven't watched my video are going on a knee-jerk reaction to my title is not something that then justifies your complete dismissal of what I've just stated 2 lines prior before your response. Again, if my channel had mostly theists, I'd have majority people misrepresenting my videos on theism, intentional or not. But that wouldn't actually change the content or the focus. So to claim that points made throughout my video and repeated time and time again, as well as that in the title, and that which I stressed at the very end is the thing I wanted people to take from my video was not made clear enough, is just a ridiculous excuse.
With regard to this and the function of student unions in the NUS, I think there are some subjects that are very touchy. And I know not everybody will agree with me. Some people take a very hardline libertarian stance and say, no, fuck it. If you've got a society, if you want an ultra-radical hardline racist to come in and give his perspective, then they ought to be just allowed to talk about it. I don't go as far as that. I think there are certain subjects, and it's for the student union to decide as a representative of the students what those subjects are, which are very contentious, perhaps more contentious among students than other people, right? And which do cause a lot of consternation amongst people. And with those particular subjects, then there might be a case where a debate format is appropriate, and where they may say, well, if you want Julie Bindel to come and talk about trans issues, that's fine, you can do that, but the LGBT society will be offered the chance to put up somebody who will talk in opposition, and you will have imposed upon you a debate format. It's not as if Julie Bindel can just come and give an hour-long monologue about what she thinks about trans people. No. The LGBT society can put somebody up in opposition and have a right to reply, have a chance to reply, and potentially to correct Julie Bindel on whatever she says. Now, I don't have a problem with that, and I think that that's actually a good format, whatever you're talking about. But where it's contentious issues, and we all know what those issues are, then I think that that's perhaps a way forward and something that I would think is a reasonable way for a student union to act. I'm interested in what you have to think, both about Peter's video, about how I've portrayed it as well, of course, and also about my little suggestion at the end. If you've got all the way to the end, thank you for watching. I've no idea how long it is, but thank you for watching. Bye for now.
So pretty much we share the same position on that, but you just thought you'd fire off because I discussed one specific argument, like I've done many times with the Kalam cosmological argument or the meeting of the salt and fresh water in the Quran, which, by the way, I do get theists coming along and saying, why haven't you dealt with the biological abiogenesis in a video discussing the Kalam? And it's like, because it's a video discussing the Kalam, which is astrophysics. I do get this sort of thing regularly. It doesn't make it right. Part 2 was going to be on the qualities to be considered when no platforming, this grayscale. And yes, my main alternative was going to be mentioned. It's pretty much the same as yours, just a little more beefed out, but I'll still give you the short version. So a person or talker is coming. A set of students protest, showing that there's an issue being taken. Now these reasons are taken into consideration just to make sure it's not trolling or something silly. So if any of them have a perceivable basis, then the talk is postponed, and the university then waits to see if there's a counter-protest, i.e. students, key here, students who do want the speaker. If that is the case, then yes, debate alternative. If, however, there was no sizable counter-protest at the university, or the anger was solely sourced from external newspapers, etc., then the talk can be dropped. This, as far as I could tell, was pretty much the case of Germaine Greer. The Feminist Society and LGBT+ Society both spoke out against the speaker, and that's Greer's niche audience, feminism, in particular in exploring female sexuality, lesbian feminists, and both spoke out against her. So we had an issue here where it was mainly the newspapers getting on people's backs and pressure coming externally, and from the reports I see, those attending the talks do seem to have been older women from outside the university. Do you see what I mean here? If we had this whole debate alternative, believe me, I would be behind that in a flash. I would start a GoFundMe campaign or something similar, along with possibly the Rationalizer or Stop Spamming, and I would chase Hamza Sorcius from university to university over the UK. I would do that personally. You would have my word on that. I don't think anyone actually doubts I would do that. Now, I even tried to explain this once to Captain McCool around the winter holidays, and he simply said that I was being long-winded. Hence, I needed to clear away some of the rubble, some of the extraneous arguments. This idea that no platforming was a violation of human rights needed to be demolished. Otherwise, discussion over no platforming was pretty pointless. If it were a human rights violation, it would be wrong 100% of the times, as a human rights violation is never justified. So I hope that clears a few things up.